Well, I'm primarily a sculptor, but over the last 3 years I've been working a lot in silkscreen prints, which does share some of the same sort of concerns in terms of layers and overlapping and hiding things, etc. And so I've always been very interested in painting, and usually have shared studios in the earlier years with next to painters and set up studios with painters. So I feel very close to painting. So what I've done is I've put together a few questions, 5 questions, and possibly one other question, to just sort of start off. And I'd like it to be fairly organic and flowing and not too kind of self-conscious. And I think there'll be a little bit of time at the end for any questions. So I've read quite a bit the introduction to the catalogue, and also been to the work here to look. And so some of the questions are loosely based on part of the text. So my first question really is that, I was very interested in the essay and Marianne Pryor's comment that all 3 artists are connected to nature, not only in the works, but also by living part of the time in the country and part of the time in London or in an urban setting. I can see in all the paintings the evidence of the countryside, but I'm wondering how an urban or London environment influences, or if you would like to talk a little bit about the differences. I know in my own case, because I moved from London to the countryside 5 years ago, so I sort of have a strong sense of how it affected me. But maybe, Jenka, if you could just say a few words about how you're influenced by both.
Well, for me it's quite new, because I lived solid in Scotland, in the north of Scotland, in the Highlands, which is very, very remote and very sort of wild, and solid for 20 years, not much coming to London. It will be 3 or 4 occasional days. And then, so I found that space very intimate and safe, and because I think for an artist you need that environment where you feel totally kind of comfortable in your own sort of skin and protected, where you kind of can be naked and you don't feel that somebody can just go look in and see you. So that's how I felt in Scotland. And when I came to London, it's a completely different energy. It's the excitement of the, energy of the big city, of so much happening. And so it took me a really long time to find that balance where I don't feel the same energy in London as I do in Scotland, of that safety and protection. So it's a very different way of working. So, I mean, for example, this self-portrait, all yellow, which all of you can't see, but I can. So yeah. This is my London studio. And it's interesting, kind of retrospectively looking and thinking about it, that I am passing through that space. That's my London space. And the biggest thing is it's a maple tree outside, which for 3 weeks of the year is just bursts with this unbelievable yellow light. And that light fills the space. So I did this painting inviting the outside, the country, this sort of that thing, but yet I'm only passing. I'm going through that. And in a way that's how I feel, I guess, about London. So in Scotland, where I'm submerged, sort of I'm there to absorb, but in London, I feel like I'm passing. So I kind of bring Scotland into London, but I don't work with, which is I gradually realize more, that I don't work with the London environment in the same way. Does it make sense? Is it explaining? Yeah, so it's a processing Scotland in London and actually being in Scotland. So
That's interesting, because maybe Lucie, because you bring work, you bring images
From
and then
other
work on
places.
those
Yeah.
images, and
Yeah.
those images are very much to do with nature and environment. Can you just also say something about
Yes,
about that?
I mean, I was just thinking about that in terms of the paintings here, because they are the images are from the rainforest in Peru, but all the paintings are worked on in London. So rather like you, I think most of my life since I left the countryside, because I came to London at 19 to go to art school. And I actually was quite reluctant. At the time, I was thinking, I don't want to go to London, I want to stay I want to go to Brighton or somewhere. And in the end, I sort of caved to a sort of pressure of, you've got to go to a London art school. My mother in particular was pushing that. So I did. And it's almost as if I've been trying to find my way back to nature, actually, properly. And I think I had this thing, I don't know whether you've heard of it, called nature deficit disorder. There's a kind of, I don't know, there's a sort of a thing going on about that at the moment, that I actually felt quite, very, very unsettled, de-centred being in London, but never quite managing to get out of London. But as you rightly say, I have a house now in Devon, in a very, in a very kind of extreme, remote part of Devon, as remote as I could possibly find, the wildest landscape I could find, which is sort of fairly accessible to London. So it's this very rugged coast, north coast, the Atlantic coast, with this incredible geology. So I have this sort of a relationship between the two places, but I'm still kind of tied to London. But I think for me, London is about people. So it's about those relationships with people, which are tremendously important. But I mean, I do find that working in London with imagery that I've sort of drawn in from other places, that does work, actually, because you can remember it so clearly. You can be there. You can be working from an image of Scotland or the rainforest, and you can really be there. You can really bring it in.
But in the context of the paintings here, in a way, there's more than that, because you've actually worked, or you've actually taken images in the rainforest, and you've brought those images back and then worked on them further.
Yes,
Either, I presume, in your Devon studio, or could be London studio.
In London.
Oh, in London. Okay.
But that is actually a very interesting thing, because the distillation of the image. So when I am in Scotland, I'm much more inclined to work from life, because I do work from life. I mean, I'll go and paint a tree. I'll actually sit outside in a very old-fashioned sense and paint what's in front of me.
Yes.
So it's accumulation of that, vocabulary. You kind of keep loading yourself in. But when I come to London, it's that abstraction and distillation of the image. That's where I have the space to move into this between seen and imagined. So it's a completely different way.
That's really interesting, actually, because I think it's a similar thing for me, because when I'm in Devon, it's like when I'm in Devon, I don't really paint. I wouldn't go into the house and paint in the house. When I'm in Devon, I'm in the environment, and I do work in Devon, but I work with photography and I work with video, and there's this incredible waterfall there, and so I do that sort of work, that I'm actually in the environment directly. And when I was in the rainforest in Peru, I didn't want to stay inside and do little drawings, and I did a few. I just wanted to be in there, in sort of encountering, having this sort of, being in the rainforest and absorbing it. And that was kind of what I wanted to do. So being in London, it's where you pull everything together in a way, isn't it? And then you get this other thing going on. I don't know whether you feel the same.
Well, I'm interested in the backdrop of figures, whether it's landscape or an urban environment. I'm interested in structural things like verticals, and those can be found in this room. There's plenty of, there's a lovely door there, there's fantastic windows out there, and it's all those kind of things that give scale in a picture, whether it's in the city, where you get lovely sort of receding verticals and windows getting smaller, or whether you're in the country and that could be in a tree and the trees get smaller and that creates the illusion of space in a painting. So whether it's urban or landscape, I see the backdrop as a device for making scale in a picture. I think that's my simple answer.
It's a good answer.
Spatial.
Spatial, yeah. I mean, look at these receding, the way your pictures are getting smaller as they recede. It's such a useful device in a painting to have something like that.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, I've moved on, I'm switching my question order, so I'm going to ask you quite a tricky one now. So, in the catalogue, I think it might be Eugenie that talks about Philip Guston.
Yeah, of course.
And so there's a quote from Philip Guston which says, "When you're in the studio painting, there are a lot of people in there with you. Your teachers, friends, painters from history, critics, and one by one they walk out. And if you're really painting, you walk out." Can you say, each of you, how do you find a way to walk out? Because we're all influenced by everything around us. And often, to actually make new work, to make great work, you have to almost forget all that and try and do something completely different. So, I know it's a tricky question, but is there some way that you feel that because in a way, you know how we get habits that tend to sort of direct works and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind actually is there's a quote at the end of the article, which is, I think it's from you, in fact, and I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like you need to stay in love with the paint.
Yes.
Stay in love with it's really
love the paint.
Love the paint.
Love the paint. Yeah.
And then trust the unconscious. Just, I don't know if it's not trust the unconscious, but it's something about just sort of having this sort of trust or this belief that what's going to go on is going to be all right. So then I suppose that brings it into a very sort of a personal sphere.
It's important to love the paint and let the unconscious speak.
Yes, exactly. So then it becomes quite a personal thing, and at that point you can lose quite a lot. Although those influences aren't intimidating you anymore, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but how do you get there? What's your process?
I don't see. I never really think of myself. I suppose my influence is nature. That is my number one. I mean, of course, I'm influenced by other artists, but I'm always looking at nature. That's my thing.
I'm conscious of that I had a teacher, a sculptor called Bill Tucker, who, when I was a student, he said to me, "Don't make sculpture, make something." And I remembered it always because I can teach anybody how to make sculpture. You know, it can look like a sculpture, it can look like art, but to make great art is something quite different. You have to almost not be making art to make great art. You know, so that's what interests me about, you know, when you walk out the door, that's when all of that stuff is.
Sometimes it's really nice to use old canvases because they've already got a story and some texture and some colour which you can accidentally then can lead somewhere.
Yeah.
I think
That's
that
a
you
good-
can listen to things happen from an old canvas.
I think also there's that sense of preciousness sometimes that you have with your work, and you think there's something great happening in a work, and then 6 months later you see it for what it is, and actually can be quite ruthless with it because you're not precious about it anymore because you know it's not very good. Some artists have done things like, you know, I know that Howard Hodgkin or Tony Caro used to put sculptures underneath a bench and cover them up and bring them out 6 months later so that they could see them almost afresh, which I think is another interesting way of trying to get around that problem.
There is a science, which I can't remember the name, there's a word for it, it's Philadelphia or whatever, I can't remember the word, but it's, you know, that when you look in the clouds, we all look in the clouds or stains on the floor, and all of us will see a different image or a different thing it creates. You will see a profile, and I'll see a horse, and I'll, you know, etc. And this is sort of, in a way, in my own work, I quite often, if I just hang the canvas, white canvas, grey, whatever, I'll sit for a while and I just imagine things. I start imagining, and then if you look at it for a long time, you know, it's that was so interesting for me, that it's a combination between projecting your subconscious, but then at the same time allowing things to come through and waiting, you know, to establish that communication, isn't it? So, and of course, you will be driven, you know, by one thing, and I will be driven by another thing, and that's what I feel, that your own individual thing will come out. You know, you just have to.
For me, it's like learning how to look the other way, so that, you know, you learn things to
from the side of
put a kind of energy or you know, an accident or something that happens in the work. So you're kind of looking over there, but working over here. And it's the same for painters, sculptors, whatever. You have to sort of incorporate those things into the work.
Accidental things.
Accidentally deliberate.
Are the best. Yes.
So it's like art, you know, when he would say, okay, I'm making art now, letting go. Whatever happened on the floor, did he make it, or did the accident made it? You know, so that is that balance in between.
I'll ask you another question. So all the paintings use imagery. There are recurring images in Susannah's work and your work in particular. Can you say something about what that starting point, how you approach, you know, so there are ideas in your head, you've worked on other paintings, you've had an exhibition, you move from one work to another. When you start the next painting, what's going through your head? What's happening?
Well, these pictures actually began 20 years ago, and I'd been living in New York, and I went to a production of Richard II at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and for the first time I started noticing I'd always been interested in geometry in painting, and I did a whole series of pictures of bicycles because I love the triangles. When you see somebody bicycling, it makes an equilateral triangle, and I find that visually very compelling. But on the stage, you often see somebody might be kneeling down and somebody might be standing up, and it's a visual geometry that the ancient Egyptians understood, the beauty of triangles. And you see that dynamic happening so often on the stage. In fact, you see it walking down the street all the time, the way people are interacting. But there's something particularly compelling about a standing figure and something on the ground. In fact, you see it when someone's walking their dog, and I love that thing when you get standing figure, then you get the lead, and then you get the dog. And look at the triangle that is made in that image. So I basically, these pictures then grew out of all the bicycle pictures, and it's just an enjoyment of geometry and finding different manifestations of that.
But in particular, when you actually you're in the studio and you're faced with a canvas or what I'm more I'm kind of very interested in what's that stage, what's the first stage, or does it go through, are you sort of looking away and doing anything until it gets to the point where you can actually do something with that, or
there's a lot of moving the image around within the rectangle, because if you think you've got your rectangle, where do you put that let's say you've identified that triangular relationship, where do you place that in the rectangle? And then you have a choice. Do you make it a landscape rectangle or a portrait rectangle? And all those decisions have to happen. And so I will have many, many, many incarnations of each of these pictures where I try and resolve.
On separate canvases?
Yes,
or
lots
all
of
the
little
same?
ones.
So do
lots
you
of-
draw, do you sort of sketch this out?
Yes,
you
yes, a bit. I do a
move on
bit of
to
every,
canvas?
anything. I play around with, you know, it might be a bottle and then something next to it, just to see these, how to reconcile that triangle within a rectangle. It's a very strange way to spend your time.
It's funny, I haven't seen the triangles in your work. I shall be looking for them now.
It's quite interesting because for me it's completely, it's not a formal. So I'm all of that will come in much later because I think painting for me is a kind of a magical thing. It's a very mysterious, and it's something which it's not my words, but again, Philip Guston, who I absolutely adore, he says that painting lives on a different plane. So in my own work, I imagine that what you look at is not really what you look at. It's sort of doesn't really matter terribly. It's what you're experiencing. So it's a lot to do with really emotional. And it's interesting because today, weirdly enough, I was watching a video, on YouTube, a lecture by a psychiatrist, Mr. Ridley, who was talking about the condition of ADHD,
Okay.
the hyperactive people. And he was describing how our brain can recall, so we're the only species on the planet Earth who could, if hold on to an image to evoke a feeling
Yes.
and memory, right? So no any other animals. And I thought, God, that's fascinating. Because in a way, that's what I'm doing. When he said it, I thought, God, this is perfect. Yes, because this, so I am blindly, but I know when it's right. I know it's in there, and so I'm kind of doing different things. I'm spilling, I'm moving, I'm scratching, I'm putting it outside, I'm checking it upside down, I'm doing all sorts of things to the canvas until I'm going, okay, it's there.
Is there a sort of a moment of recognition
Yes.
with it, and then you think, oh yes, that's it.
And sometimes this moment doesn't come. And sometimes
Go round
I'm
and
thinking, I kind of like it for other reasons. And I'm thinking, is that fair? Do I destroy it? So this process, it's really ongoing, endless. I'm sure there's some painters in this room, and some of you might know what I'm talking about, but it never leaves you, and then you, like you say, the corner of your eye, because I live in my studio, so this work is just, you suddenly look and go, oh, God, I know. So you go and do it, and then you go, oh, why did I do this? And so, but sometimes it's just like, it's there.
I've talked to painters who have had to more or less, so they've been working on a painting, and there's so much about it that they love, but there's something wrong with it.
Yeah.
And it's actually one tiny bit that's right, and 90% of it is wrong. So you have to get rid of that 90%
Exactly.
in order to capture what it is that's good about the picture.
And you end up destroying half of it, it's-
Oh, you must.
But that's the magic, isn't it? That's
It's like the Picasso quote. It's a I can't remember what it is. It's a history of destruction in a way, with a painting. So it might be just almost there, but it's just not. There's something quite wrong. And you know that I love this part of the painting, these beautiful runs here, but they've got to go. So then there's all this loss involved in it.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about the layering in all of your works, really. And I know that when I'm working on these silkscreen prints, so I go for 3 days to work with these guys in Cambridge, and it's strange because the first day is almost, it could almost be anything. We're using screens, we're using images, we're putting them down. But I'm conscious of the fact that that is a kind of backdrop. And the second day becomes more, and then the third day, usually, everything starts to come together. And I'm wondering whether in the paintings, you know, that you have this, even if it's a sort of subconscious thing of creating layers, creating backdrop that you know isn't the painting, but that will set up a kind of interaction with what you might do then, you know, in the painting.
Well, there's I think it's John Hoyland. He sort of said that, you know, if you get the first stage right, then you're kind of on the way. You know, so it sounds like your screen printing process. So you have the starting point, and then you have the next bit, and then you have the next bit. But for me, it's not like that.
No.
And that would be great. You know, it'd be so nice if there was a bit more of a formula than there is, but there so isn't. You know, you sort of wish for one in a way.
Yes.
Oh, if only.
But
So
no,
that-
don't wish for that. I mean, there's so many artists
but
who have
sometimes it'd be
formulas,
so nice
but
if
that's
it's a bit
deadening.
easier.
No, that's
Yeah.
I just don't. You know, you're in a corridor. I think that's what the most wonderful thing. Somebody said to Philip Gaston when he was on his 80th birthday, and he had this amazing, you know, it's actually a documentary. And if any artists here haven't seen it, you should watch it. I think it's called. No, I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, it's his last documentary he made. And somebody asked him in the audience a question, you know, but Mr. Gaston, you know, you used to paint abstract. He was a very well-known American expressionist, and then he suddenly, age 55, you know, he suddenly switched painting all those bizarre, almost cartoon characters, Ku Klux Klan, etc. And then they said, well, are you going to carry on changing your styles? What about your style? And he said, who cares about style? I just have to keep myself awake and alive and entertained, you know. That is really, by the end of the day, as long as you are.
But it's an interesting thing, that point of when something becomes an artist's style, because you see it with you know, an artist like Howard Hodgkin, who worked for years and years and years and often spent 15, 20 years working on one painting. And then the final part of the painting, you know, could just be a few brush marks, but that painting is kind of what's beneath that has taken all that time, and it's sort of been kind of, you know, brewing up all this time. But then later on, Hodgkin knows how to make a Hodgkin. So then you destroy that point at which an artist, you know, the really interesting point when you change work, and it's really hard for it to happen over and over again, is where you're in a total mess but excited, and you know, something is right on the edge of something you don't know about, you know.
Well, that's it, isn't it? There always has to be that space of the unknown. Something you just can't do without. You can never go down that formulaic way. Otherwise, what are you doing? Why
Yeah, but
would you
this
be
is
doing
a absolutely different question. You know, you're talking about the recognition and commercializing, you know, putting yourself into a sense of a brand which the whole art world, and we spoke about it.
No, because it goes back as well to that thing of whether you're that thing that I told you about Bill Tucker, where he said, "Don't make a sculpture," and it comes back to the thing of if you're making art, then sometimes you're not making art. You're just making art that looks like art, and that I think is the point at which when an artist gets to a certain stage, and galleries often love it because you know once you've got that style, they can commercialize it and sell it. So artists have to always be really careful about how they keep on that edge of change, and you do it all the time. I mean, you're shifting from here. You're all over the place.
Thanks.
I don't mean in a bad way. You know.
Well, I went to see Sickert exhibition, and the first room, it was really interesting for me. The first room, I don't know, have any of you gone to see it? And it's his self-portraits. So he started, as you all know, as an actor, and so he is shape-shifter. He's literally in one room. He paints, 6 paintings, and they all are completely different. And it's all him at the same time, and all of them, you can see that. And I thought, gosh, maybe I meant to be an actress. I don't know. Shape-shift.
Give it a go, why not?
Anyway, it was really amazing. I adored the show. I went with little expectations, and I think this whole limitation about having to, I don't know, I mean, it is my blessing and a curse, you know, I feel, you know, overtrained, you know, that probably I was trained in Moscow, yeah, I can draw, I can whatever, do most of the thing, I mean, it sounds, but it's a curse, you know, so, but I don't see it when I'm making my work. I'm not having out-of-body experience floating above me going, Vronskaya, you're doing at the moment this style, or yes, you moved into this, or you moved into this. I'm just making and doing what I am in the moment at the time, and only when, you know, time passes by, I'm thinking, oh God, yeah, that looks like this, or that looks like this, or, you know, I don't know about it as I'm doing it.
No.
I have no control of saying to myself, when I was approached by Tom Hullett, you know, years and years ago at, you know, the Portland Gallery, who said, I want to give you a show. And I was like, of course, I'm so excited, my God. And he said, I want 50 paintings like this.
Oh.
You've chosen a painting. He said, I want it like this. And I went, no problem. So off I went to Scotland, sat in my little studio, desperately trying to make 50 paintings like this. And my paintings just turned into mud, and by the week 3 I just couldn't paint. And it was, I remember that it was before Christmas, I had to ring him and say, thank you, but no. And I put down the phone and cried for about 20 minutes, and then I felt, phew, it felt completely, I could go back and paint, but I don't know how to do it. Just don't know how to do it.
Yeah, it doesn't work, does it? When you.
No.
Okay, I have a tricky one for you now. Clement Greenberg said, if you want to change your art, change your habits. Which habits would you change, or would you like to change, or are you aware of as being habits in your work?
Oh, habits in your work specifically, not just day-to-day habits. Okay.
No, in the sense that, you know, we use certain things in our work. There are ingredients that we always, you know, that we put in, and that sometimes to make art, you probably have to get rid of a lot of that.
Thinking
because
too
the
much.
habits become.
So that would be yours.
Thinking too much. Yes.
Overthinking. Yeah.
Yes. Get rid of the brain. Just as you said, Eugenie, just you've learnt the language. You've then got to get rid of it.
That's right.
So that you have a more direct, so that take the ego out of it, take the knowledge out of it, and let the story be told.
Mm-hmm.
It's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
So the brain gets in the way. So how do you break that habit? I don't know. Any ideas?
Well, I think for me because I have that as well a bit. I think the mind just racketing on and doing all its stuff. But I personally find that the engagement with the materials, it silences the brain. Do you find that?
Well, maybe let the paint speak.
Yes, the paint
That's
speaks.
what I was probably trying to say.
Exactly. So once you're sort of involved in that kind of, you know, that reality of
the sensuous.
The media, yes, the sensuous, the media, the colours touching, the water and the capillary action, all these things.
Sure.
Then it's sort of operating on a different level,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yes.
It's not that the mind. It's a sort of, I don't know, it's not exactly dreamlike either, but it's a different level of intelligence. So it's like a sensorial intelligence. It's not a, and I find that I have to get there for things to happen.
But that's getting there. What's the habit that you're conscious of that
a habit, yes.
is kind of affecting the work from being, you know, sometimes what you want it to be? You know, it's getting in the way.
But then, so if there's a bad habit for me, it would be getting too much into detail. So I think I'll go there. I love that. That's going to work. I'm going to just do this, and I get started. Mm-hmm. And then you have to sort of step back and go, you know, from the minuscule from the general from the particular to the general again. Mm-hmm. So I find I get too much into detail, and I have to move away from that. But I don't know how I'd sort of decide to do that in a way? In the answer to your question, I'm not sure.
Well, by being aware that you do it.
I suppose, yes, being aware.
Is a step.
Yes, yes.
Which you are. You are aware.
Yeah, yeah, and because I mean, I've actually done this sort of thing where, you know, you're sort of worried about how a drawing looks. So I'm sort of drawing some plants, and I was worried. Okay, I want it to look a certain way. I was saying, no. It's about the immediacy of the process. It's about the immediacy of the looking, and what's happening, what's coming through. So I was doing the drawing, and I was thinking, oh, what's it look like? Is it going to be good? You know. So I mean, I had this sort of sequence where I did these drawings, and I never actually looked at them at all to get away from that. I actually tore them up before I even saw them, to try and contest that, you know, that sort of feeling of it's got to look a certain way. So I'm not sure if that's exactly it, but yeah, things like that, getting away from certain kinds of expectations, but is it looking right, or is it looking good, or whatever, and letting something else that you want to come, you know, what you want it to be doing, come through, I think.
Well, I know what it is. I just, I have to, the discipline to stop when I say I'm going to stop.
And I have a solution.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You just have to get someone to come to the studio
Well, I used to.
during the night and take the paintings away when they're what you call half finished.
I used to have a dear friend, John Mackenzie, back in Scotland. He used to come towards the end of my, because obviously with small children, I had to stop before I go, you know, they come back from school. He used to come just before and take the painting away. I mean, literally, he used to come and take the painting away. And blessing, I mean, he's sadly, he's no longer with us, but yes, for me, it's that discipline to stop.
My biggest mistrust is definitely ideas. They don't work. And so I think that I have these fantastic ideas in sculpture, and as soon as I start it, and I stand back, because I always make sculpture in front of, you know, I don't send them off to be made, I make them. So as soon as I stand back, it's like, no. So you set off with one idea and just, in your head, you can never trust your head, because it's telling you all the wrong things.
No, absolutely not. It's totally true. I mean, the best paintings I made, the really brilliant, amazing paintings I've made, they're here. Because the moment you try them on, it's like, oh my God, there's no way.
Yeah. Well, I spoke to the three artists at the weekend, and I said, well, perhaps, you know, you could come up with what question you would ask yourself, and so maybe you could say what that was.
Well, the one that just immediately popped into my mind, which is actually a really difficult one, but that's what came out, so I thought, okay, I may as well run with that, which is, what part does beauty play in the work, both in the looking and in the making, and how does that work? So that was my question to myself, and the answer is, because I don't know about how you know what you know about the sort of the art world, but beauty is quite an unfashionable kind of concept at the moment, or maybe not so much now, but it certainly has been. It's been something that's been very much avoided and kind of trivialised, and it's sort of, I'm not sure where it goes back to, but there is a Barnett Newman quote in 1968 where he says something along the lines of, painting used to be about pursuing beauty, but that for me is meaningless, and now we know that the world is not beautiful, then we don't need to do that anymore. It was kind of like this decision, sort of after the Second World War, there's that Adorno quote about you can't do poetry after Auschwitz, you know, all that sort of thing. So you've got to get rid of this idea of beauty, and this idea of beauty is it's bourgeois, and it's retrograde, and it's all those things. So very much in the art world, there's a sort of feeling of, you can't. And I mean, I've had that in my research, because I'm doing a research degree, and in various of my supervisors, and they sort of say, oh no, we do not pursue beauty in our work. We do, you know, it's actually sort of quite taboo.
But is that something to do with that if you set out or try to set out to make something beautiful, there's a difference between something being beautiful. You know, I'm making, when I moved to the countryside, my sculpture changed hugely. And so from being very sort of geometric, angular, architectural, it became very organic. And some people have said to me, they're very beautiful.
Yeah,
I don't set out to make them beautiful. They just end up.
I don't think
sometimes being like that.
I mean, for me, it's something that's sort of hugely important to me, and I don't think that it's not just about how a thing looks aesthetically. I'm not sort of trying to make something look nice aesthetically. I think it's much more than that. I think it's much deeper, and I think for me it sort of relates to my relationship with the natural world. So that when you're in the natural, you know, you're in a kind of a wild space. There is this experience sometimes of powerful beauty, and I don't think, oh well, that's a pretty thing. I think it's more than that. I think it's something about, you know, being in that place. There's almost like a sort of an encompassing energy that you're part of. You know, that you're part of this kind of field, this sort of almost energy field of everything that's sort of all the ecology, and that something about beauty is almost like an energy, and that it's when you see something that's beautiful, it's sort of, there's something that's being communicated almost. And so it's like a toing and froing of that. And so when I'm working with it in my work, you know, it just becomes sort of a live thing. I mean, you know, you're dealing with this colour against that colour, and then it kind of does that, and you're pulled towards that. But why are you pulled towards that? You know, I feel like there's a quite a deep language. There's quite a deep thing going on, which I don't really understand. But I think there's, you know, why do we experience beauty? It's not just, oh, humans sort of have this response. I think there's something more going on, which is, you know, it's like something reciprocal perhaps between you and where you are, you know, in nature. So I think that's how it is for me. So when my paintings are working, I'm not sort of thinking, are they beautiful or not? But it's something about, is there a poetic? Does it reach a kind of a poetic? I think something like that. I don't know. I mean, I could go on about that, but I don't know if anybody else has any sort of feelings about.
Did you have any? Did you think about that?
The question I was considering, I suppose, was that when Vivian came to the studio and she saw these pictures that I'd started 20 years ago, and it was a question. I think you said to me, Vivian, are they finished? And it raised such an interesting question, because the gestation of 20 years, you know, how do you revisit a painting that you began 20 years ago? But with trepidation, I did revisit them, and because I was so afraid that I would change them completely and then destroy the original impulse.
Did you think they weren't finished then?
I felt that there was some, a bit like a sort of needing to cross the T's when you're writing a letter. You know, they're just a little bit unresolved.
Because there's an interesting thing of, you know, when something started 20 years ago, and you now look at it and think, do I want to add something from where I am now? You know, how I'm thinking now, which is different. And if paintings, because often paintings are finished and they're left. With paintings that, like you're describing, they seem to have sort of sat there and in this sort of middle area of not finished, but maybe, but could move on. It's interesting because I talked to a sculptor, Bill Tucker, who said, oh, I want to make these sculptures that I remember making in the 1960s, but they were destroyed or they were never finished. And he said, I'm thinking of remaking them how I think of them now. And I thought it was a really interesting way of working, because artists tend not to go backwards.
No.
You know, you tend not to go back to areas of your work that you had before.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I do work on old canvases, and the only reason I will, you know, you pull out an old canvas and you think, oh, you can't travel back to whatever you was doing then, but you can see it as a new material to work with now, because everything is different. So the moment we were talking about it earlier on, because if you know, I teach, and actually there is one student here is, I always say, if you like one area, if you think, well, this is really successful, you start dancing around it and you become paralyzed. You're willingly putting handcuffs on yourself. You can't paint anymore, really freely, because you're so worried that you're going to destroy that.
Yes.
And everything else is not real anymore. It's like this kind of what I call sort of like almost sort of masturbation. You're sort of running around it and you're not really doing the real thing. And so for me, it's the only way. You have to accept that whatever you're looking at is not what, you take it as a new beginning. You have to kind of go, well, full pelt. You can't dance around it. You just have to make something completely new and different.
That's why I find that quite often working on old canvases can be really successful, because at the time originally when I was working on them, I might be obsessed by a certain bit. And I've kept sort of, it's not working because of that. It's not working. I think of all the pain of that particular bit, I can't see it as a whole. So then you leave it for 6 months and you come back and the thing becomes a whole thing. You see yourself. And you've lost that kind of connection, and then you can sort of do something more general and more liberated.
Yeah,
and then it can work.
But my question to me, I was thinking about it as well. I would love, I don't know if it's a question, but it's sort of an urgent request. I wish I could, very similar to you, Susannah, I could get rid of that critic, that voice, that horrendous judgmental person who doesn't allow things to come directly through. And I think it's you might, the way I say it may just not actually have the weight, but if you imagine just that you can directly paint. And Philip Guston, again, he used to do that. He used to come to a huge canvas, he would paint without stepping back. Because what we do, we put one mark and then we step back and we go, destroy, back, another mark, destroy. And so all you do, one hand is making, another destroying. And then he used to come in and just paint. Then turn around, walk out of the studio, not looking, and only return the next day to look. So you don't have an instant distraction at yourself. So I'd like, it's, when de Kooning, when he got Alzheimer's, so he would just go and paint. Everything was just flowing out without, not that I want Alzheimer's, no, I don't want that. I just hope it can happen. I want it to happen in that non-filter, the judgment voice to go away.
I think we're all united.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Is there sort of, in your head, is there this, a painting should take so long, otherwise it might not be very good. You know what I mean? It's like, it could, you have a Picasso that he could do in like 3 brushstrokes. In your mind, sometimes is it like, well, that's not enough.
Yeah, but all that got, because I'm thinking of myself, you know me for so long, I used to complete the painting very quickly, I paint fast. I do paint fast. Anything, light, whatever. But all that I get, that voice is so annoying. It makes me paint for a very long time. So maybe because that judgment keep saying, it's not good enough.
But you're aware of it, so...
I know, but I don't know how to change it. I just...
Therapy.
Everybody has that. It's...
I look at some of my older work and I'm thinking, God, it didn't stop me stopping here. It looks fine. It looks fresh. It looks good. Why don't I just stop now?
I've got an example of that actually, which is... somebody came to my studio once in sort of, 1990 something or other, and she came in and she said, I'm buying that painting, and it wasn't even finished. It was something that was in the, it's in the middle of. I thought, what do you mean, you can't have that? Then she said, I want that. So okay, so I gave it to her. She bought it, and now it's in her house, and I go and see it, and it's really wonderful painting, and it's completely kind of resolved. And if I'd have left it and carried on, I probably would have, I don't know what I would have done to it, but I might have messed it up, I don't know. But that's so interesting, you know, isn't it, that sometimes you can't see the thing. You can't see the thing as a whole, because the judgment thing is coming and saying,
The judge,
look at
judge.
that, that's not right. No, it can't be, whatever.
So maybe at this point, I don't know if anyone has any, in the audience, anyone has any questions?
In your paintings, do you think of them as a group together when you're painting them? And also, you seem to have a kind of, in terms of composition, you have a sort of middle piece that is kind of surrounded by something. You know, I don't know if that was again, if that's an intentional thing.
A middle piece.
Or a sort of middle focal point in a sense.
Yeah, I think
It's
so.
kind of lighter and then hidden by the sort of front part.
I think there is a bit of that. There's like a bit of a heart of light sometimes. In some of them, not all of them, I think. Yes, but yes, in 3 of those there is that heart of light. But in answer to your first question, I don't think of them as a series when I'm working on them. I think of them as individuals completely, which is why it's interesting seeing them one after the other, and then the 2 upstairs as well, because they do have a narrative, don't they, going from one to the next to the next. But I don't really think of it like that when I'm, you know, each is its own kind of thing when I'm working on it.
Does any one of you listen to music when you work? And if so, does it influence what you make?
Good
Yeah.
question.
Well, I'm sure. I listen to the music all the time, yeah.
In the afternoons, I allow a little bark or handle.
I can't go in the studio unless I put music on. I can't work without music.
What sort of music? What sort of music?
Could be anything, but mainly opera.
Oh,
But I have to listen to music.
really?
Yeah, and I remember when I first started making sculpture, or before I really started making sculpture properly, I went to Tony Caro's studio in London, and it's a huge space, and in the walls above there were speakers, and he was playing chamber music, and there was these enormous sculptures going on, and I thought, that's what I want. I want to make big things like that and listen to music all day long. So I can't work without it. But some I know, lots of artists, they hate it.
I don't work with music at all. I mean, I used to, at one point I did, it's true, but now I don't. I think partly because, actually when I'm doing the painting, I wouldn't hear it anyway. You sort of cut it out, you sort of, so I don't.
I play over and over. When I'm working on one piece, I play the same music over and over again. And I drive my assistants absolutely crazy because it could go on days and days and days. Same thing over, because it's to do with, there's something about the piece of music that relates to the work at that point.
That's why they all leave.
Well, but they probably don't like opera that much. Actually, you say that, but, I've educated quite a few people.
They're no longer with you.
Do we have any more questions?
Susannah, you said you went to see it was a Richard II play, so are these Lucie Winterson narratives inspired by it, or what?
Yes, I was saying about that triangular relationship. There was, I can't remember if it was one particular scene, but actually there's the famous line in Richard II, "Let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings." And there was Richard II on the ground with somebody sort of standing next to him, I don't know, pointing at him or something, and it was that dynamic. So I think it did grow out of that, but there were a lot of emotional things in that play that were very striking for me, particularly at that time. So it's always a balance between the geometry and the composition and the narrative and the emotional content of the picture. So I suppose earlier I spoke about geometry as though that was the only thing that mattered, but the geometry is there to serve the story, And I think painting is theatrical as well. I think the fact that it shares in common with theatre four walls, and everything you view through that rectangle is a sort of theatrical thing. So
Yes, it does have a narrative, doesn't it?
yeah, so that.
And do you think about the Trinity? I mean,
Yes, well, I mean, I'm obsessed with triangles, so
but sort of trinities of people as well, threesomes, three people, three.
Yes. Anything to do with geometry of, just beautiful things like people, even if somebody's on their phone, right, you get the most beautiful triangle from the shoulder to the elbow to the wrist. It's a very simple geometric shape, and you see it everywhere. And I'm always sort of staring at someone.
And it pulls you.
Actually, I'm just looking at the shapes that their arms are making.
But why don't you, for example, it makes me think of Paul Klee, who reduced the visual world into geometrical squares and triangles.
Yes.
And, I mean, there's plenty, and he literally, or even Mondrian, who had a whole very complex theory about verticals and horizontals, and he went through the whole period of saying there is no single diagonal line, it's only going to be vertical and horizontal, etc. So why would you not reduce the visual world to your beloved triangle? Why don't you just paint?
It might yet happen, and sort of distill things into. I mean, the ancient Egyptians did it. They understood the purity and the simplicity of the human figure. Look at those wall paintings. They're all telling stories.
Yep.
And they're telling the stories through the geometry of the human figure, and that's, as well as telling the story, they're also decorating the tomb or whatever it is. And it's this beautiful fusion of narrative and visual decoration.
No, but they create symbols, so it's symbolic. So they created an alphabet of stories. So that's kind of almost another realm, the whole new level, devoid of any emotional thing. It's like, here's the lettering, and then you can make your own words. So,
but what I noticed in your pictures was that I noticed that straight away. I mean, obviously the angles, the triangles, the shapes. But what you did was that all of the paint around those emphasised that. So I found that really interesting. That you can use a very painterly kind of approach around something that is quite still painterly but geometric, or in a different kind of way, but that everything surrounding it enhances that. It's as if it's trapping it, but it's also surrounding it. Do you know what I mean? All the movements, all the sort of paint marks on the surface around it are making that more evident. That's how I felt.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just enjoying the triangle of Eugenie's, the elbow to see. I mean, look how beautiful that is. I mean, it's just
Very nice.
and it's so lovely because it's her head. The tilt of her head is supported by that angle, and then you get the shape between. That. Look at that shape.
I mean, I've got a question. I'm not
Excuse
moving,
me.
but would you paint just the shape, or would you need my arm and my head? I mean, that's my question. Is really.
I could certainly think about just painting that incredibly beautiful shape inside that triangle, and additionally, what's adding to this drama for me at this angle is the vertical of the window behind you, because the diagonal of your that bit of the arm is making the most beautiful 45-degree angle against that vertical.
Have I ruined it now?
Sorry, but
Have I ruined it now?
Yeah.
Is it wrong?
You'd be beautiful whatever you did.
Triangles. So it is triangles
It's
after all.
triangles.
Yeah. Okay. No more questions. My goodness, we must have been so clear about everything. Mystery resolved.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for
Thank you.
hosting
It's great.
us.
Thank you very much.